Welcome to the Week 7 wrap-up. Genevan folks, it was a busy week. Shipment came in. We met up for beers and got to, in person, not just online, complain/brag about our teams and talk about all things that will be in the second half of the season. I'm also kind of following my former volleyball team I coached in Zimbabwe in their international tournament, so it's been a distracting one. We also got people leaving the country, people out of town. It's been hectic. Last Sunday was a great day for football. Weirdly enough, on the chat group, we're starting to talk about maybe showing up and watching football together, so you'll know what I'm all talking about when I do these recaps. But if you missed last Sunday, it was National Tight End Day for all those who celebrate, and the tight ends came out in full force. So for a little bit of an NFL recap, here we go to the main stories from Week 7. Week 7, as it does, was more of an equalizer. Now, there was a return to form for offenses, which we'll talk about in a second, but one of the biggest things is I feel like sometimes when you're forced to try and look up stories and talk about these things, maybe we overestimate. Last week, I made a bit of a stink about teams who might already start tanking. That was a bit premature. You can't tank that easily in football. Plus, all the teams that had a reason to lose didn't. Now, granted, the Broncos were playing the Packers, and you could argue that both had a reason to kind of throw it, but the Packers were looking better, and the Broncos got their second win. You look at the Giants, they could have tanked, they didn't. Bears and Raiders, arguably, they both could have been the tank field, but certainly the Bears, and they definitely didn't, coming out with a good offensive performance. The Colts fell short to the Browns, but just barely, and they could have probably been a little bit more moderate. The Patriots, probably the big one, taking down the Bills, who are a lot of people's favorites. And then the Vikings, which I'll speak about later, because obviously against the 49ers, that's quite a big deal. So we did have an even balance here, and while we still have two teams that stand out in the Eagles and the Chiefs, preseason favorites, looked great. Eagles did a great job against a tough Miami, and the Chiefs actually looked fun again to cheer for. They had an offense that was worth watching. So that kind of helped level things up. I do think leading into the week, if you looked at the previous weeks, I made a comment about how scores were in general down. Doing a little bit of research, I was looking at things like sacks have been a little bit up this year. And there is this massive percentage that if you get sacked on the first two downs, or even obviously third down's a big sacking down that ends the drive. But even if you get sacked in the first two downs, statistically, you don't end up converting the fourth down at a high rate. And sacks have been a lot higher this year. They were a little bit lower this past week. Maybe that had something to do with it. Either way, defenses were getting tired. Offenses sure weren't, which doesn't always happen in the cooler weather. So that was actually kind of fun to see. We noticed this in our fantasy scores because there was more green than red. Now, unfortunately, still a few of you were stuck in the red zone, not the good red zone, but being in the red. But a lot of us were in the green. In fact, one of the disappointing things could have been, this is one of those weeks that you can look at your score, look back at previous weeks and be like, wow, if I would have had that in week 4 or week 5, I would have been successful. But hey, you weren't. Also, randomly, we love our days for no particular reason. Happy National Tight End Day. If you were watching on Sunday, they made a big stink. They made T-shirts. It was essentially a made-up holiday, but you can make the arguments that most holidays are in fact made up. And weirdly enough, the tight ends came to form. In terms of non-quarterback-based positions, Travis Kelce was our number 1 tight end. I'll get to him in just a second. But number 6 and number 7 overall were Andrews and Waller. So we had 3 tight ends. If you compare tight end and wide receiver, they were in the top 10 for that. Quite good, right? And Kelce being at the top of the heap. Not quite as good as the quarterbacks. He was 3rd overall in scoring if you include everybody. But his number 1 was obviously Mahomes. If you watch that game, pretty entertaining. I think the announcing booth is getting a better indication of how many times you can mention Taylor Swift and infer the wrath of people who are upset about everything online. Although I have to say, as someone who doesn't really have a dog in the fight, but I certainly don't hate the mentions. I think it's fine. I don't think it's ruining football to mention that someone famous is in the stands. But I got to say, Taylor has better friends than most other NFL players. You look at someone like Carr, throws the ball massively out of bounds, doesn't know how to operate in front of people, plus he looks kind of freaky if you just get some screenshots of him, but throws the ball out of bounds and yells at his receiver. Now, Olave, his receiver, is not known for being the brightest. In fact, you could look up a really entertaining video of him being stopped by the police, expecting preferential treatment and getting none of it. But, clearly when you have a behavior that is socially unacceptable, your friends, if they're your true friends, try and correct you. And these NFL players like Carr don't show that. Whereas Taylor, if you look at the way she's cheering, she's much better at cheering on point. She definitely is aware the camera's in front of her, but she's playing up to them. She had a little high five action with Mahomes' wife, so that's always kind of nice. So I think at least she's taking feedback and becoming a better spectator. perhaps some of these others could be just as open. In terms of another story, I think the Bears presented an interesting one here. We've had an explosive offense for the last little bit, Fields being out. But one of the coolest people I was looking up, Tyson Bagent, I think it's Bagent, the backup who is now the starter until Fields' finger feels better. Crazy story. So his dad is a professional, or was a professional arm wrestler. He was a Div 2 player, so not Div 1. He won the version of the Heisman that you give to the Player of the Year last year for Div 2. But his football career ended because he lost in the national semifinals, I believe, to the Colorado School of Mines. $10 if you knew that was a school beforehand, or if you can name their mascot. Are you guessing? Can you figure it out? It's the Ore Diggers. Colorado Mines Ore Diggers. Yep. You learned something new there because there's no way you knew that before. He's an interesting story. Came out and had a great game. Obviously led them to a win. Another big upset was obviously the one on Monday night. Now that dictated a lot of our fantasy matchups, which we'll get to in a second. Now McCaffrey played, which had to be a massive relief for anyone who had him coming into a Monday night with a star running back who you don't know if is going to play. Hella nerve-wracking, so I don't envy that position. McCaffrey did fine. Everyone else not so much. Now, Purdy's an interesting one. You can't ever really get mad at him. He has one of the most favorable contracts in the league. He's actually, if you took all the backup, so all the quarterbacks and the backups, just the backup quarterbacks, he is the 34th ranked backup quarterback in terms of how much pay he gets. If you take all quarterbacks, he's over the 64th best paid quarterback. So obviously one of the cheapest quarterbacks in the game. He's a starting quarterback, but you know the NFL, they hate their players. They'd rather they just run into a pile and die than actually support them. So there's no way of restructuring this unless he tries to get out of his contract, which you essentially can't do like you can in other sports. So he's over the 12th. There's 1,200 people, more than 1,200 people in the NFL getting paid more than him, even though he's in a premier team and a premier position. But he didn't really step up against Minnesota. Shock of the world that Minnesota is actually rallying. For a lot of people, they were calling that this could be Cousins' last ever game as a Viking, and then he was going to get traded. Turns out not. For those of you who have been reading sports journalism well into the 90s, there's something called the Ewing theory. You can look it up, or I can share a link with you. Effectively, there was a New York Knicks team that Patrick Ewing was their best player. He got hurt and then went on this massive run and made it to the finals. I think it was in 99. I'd have to check that up. But the Ewing theory suggests that sometimes when your best player is out, everybody else steps up and somehow you become a better team. Justin Jefferson out. Possible Ewing theory candidate here. We have Addison, who was more than happy to step up. So all this to say, I had a second week in a row where I got to watch a ton of football. Again, the football I can't say was amazing, but I had a hell of a time. The games were tight. It was fun to watch, fun to cheer for fantasy. Speaking of fantasy, let's get to the matchups. After a few weeks or even part of a season of me mocking Jackie for barely squeaking over the line, she definitely spiked the ball this week. Highest score of the week and not even really that close. I don't know if Raph and James can feel lucky, though. At least they don't have to buy drinks this week, so the Black Widow did not return. But Jackie certainly had something to say about the overall score, because if you notice, she actually had two of the most disappointing, outstanding performances. Ridley is in many people's a top-tier wide receiver, for wide receiver one, meaning he's typically one of the top 12. Uncharacteristically on Thursday night, just had a stinker, dropped a couple passes or had a couple miscommunications with Lawrence. And then Bijan was definitely, they're actually, I don't know how much people look into this. There has been a claim to put into the Atlanta organization and the coach, Arthur Smith, who's just kind of like a billionaire who likes to run a team on the side. Sorry, you can tell by my previous comments about Atlanta's offense. I love their players. I hate the way they're run. He withheld the fact that he wasn't feeling that great. So Robinson was on the sidelines in a uniform, but not playing. He got in for one carry at the end, I think because they probably started hearing the heat. Typically, he did get in occasionally on blocking coverages, but apparently he just woke up, felt horrible. It is a NFL bylaw for gamblers, because gamblers run the NFL, if you haven't figured this one out yet. Gamblers like us, so don't criticize them. But effectively, you have to report these things before game time, and they had more than enough time to do it, and they did not. So they're actually getting investigated for it. Doesn't help Jackie out, though, because she couldn't put someone else in. Everyone I know, you started him in every league because there was no notification. Long ramble to say two players in typically high-producing players for Jackie got 1.3. So obviously, you know the story that the rest of her team essentially went off. Mahomes finally looked like Mahomes. If you've been watching that quarterback series and you're wondering what's all the hype about this guy, he doesn't always pass for 4 touchdowns and 400 yards, but to be honest with you, that's more part of his history than what I've seen so far this year. So it was great to see the Chiefs actually playing like the Chiefs again. He was the quarterback one. Foreman, massive pickup by Jackie. It's almost like someone told you to do it and then you did it, and now it's awesome. Look at me trying to take credit. Didn't think Foreman does this but once or twice a year. And props to Raph for the indiscreet genitalia drawing on the chat group. That was pretty entertaining to kind of highlight this. But yeah, massive performance from him. He was our RB1. AJ Brown, our wide receiver 2. Your tight end here in Goddard was our tight end 4 during National Tight End Day. So the fact that the Bills got stomped by the Patriots didn't seem to bother you. Your pluses were just too high. Ralph James, what can I say? 124. You definitely had a score that would have beaten some, and you didn't have a horrible week. The problem really was you didn't have too many guys who went off. I mean, St. Brown, I thought, had a good performance. Hurts was a quarterback 5, I think, for us. So obviously he did okay. And your kicker, you're the only one that took a kicker in the top 5. The other 4 are just free agent kickers. Just throwing it out there if people want some kicking points, although they do fluctuate week by week. Everyone did fine, though, but like Walker was supposed to go off, just around as predicted. Stevenson, same. Your boy Allen didn't really do as much as he normally had. Now, unfortunately for you, if you do the math, you actually did have enough points to make this crazy tight. Of course, Jackie could have put in Najee Harris, and effectively that would have won it for sure. But if you would have done your prime matchups, I actually think you would have tied or maybe possibly just kind of gone over. Pac Nakua, I mean, you got a receiver problem right now because you've got 4 good ones and you can only play 3. So this is just something you're probably going to have to deal with unless you want to get fancy and make a trade. So didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but obviously you underperformed, which was disappointing. Herbert, probably your biggest disappointment, had just a brutal game against Kansas City, and you really needed him to step up. So unfortunately for you, I mean, you still keep the top 4 spot because as we'll see with the league rankings, there's a little bit of a separation. But Jackie stakes her claim, keeps her ground, technically tied for first, second on points, and our overall number 1 this week. So well done, Jackie. Speaking of tied for first, 6-1, although in this particular case, Pamela has the first place lead by points scored, came out with a super strong outing. Now, this is kind of indicative. A lot of the points, even the last match, was within 15. This one as well. All of them were super tight this week. It's kind of nice to see it come down to a couple games. So in this particular case, normally 13 points or 12 and change would be enough to be the tightest matchup, especially when both teams go over predicted. This time, there's actually a couple that are even closer, as we'll get to. But how Pamela held on here, I mean, Lawrence finally had a decent game. We knew that one earlier. That was the Thursday nighter, and we know he's not passing as much as he could. He's doing a bit more with his legs, which certainly help out. Baker Mayfield looked like it was another good pickup, had a decent week. But realistically, I think for Pamela, one of the biggest things was consistency. That, Cup was definitely an underperformance. And I think Pac Nakua kind of took a lot away from him. Buffalo didn't kick as many as normal. So obviously you're going to have an issue there. Miami, surprisingly, though, even though they got kind of trounced, they did end up scoring because they got that touchdown, which really helped them out. But realistically, it was just solid performances all around. Now, granted, Hill was in our top 5. He was our wide receiver 5, actually. And same with Andrews. As I mentioned, he was our tight end 2 and had a great week. But other than that, it was just points from all around, which helped add up in the end. Even on the bench, you left a few points, Addison being your big one, but he had a monster game. I benched him as well in another league against San Francisco's defense. I don't think anyone thought Minnesota would come out that fierce. And your quarterback here, it looks like you got a little bit of quarterback depth, which is nice because you didn't start the one who apparently has had one too many massages on the shoulder. And no, I'm not going to stop making massage jokes. He deserves to have that mentioned with his name for the rest of his life. He's got a bit of an issue now. Apparently they're saying it's a small tweak. Came in, looked horrible, threw a pick, threw another ball that should have been a pick, and then they took him out of the game. So that wasn't awesome. Now, Jules, you didn't have a good bench, but you did have a good outing here, and you got tons of talent on the field. It just fell a little bit short. McCaffrey was your big question mark, and I was kind of worried about you. I thought maybe he wasn't going to play at the last minute, and in which case you'd have to end up sporting the bill at one point in time. Unfortunately, the bill sporting stayed in your household, but we'll get to him later. McCaffrey had a fine performance outside of the top 5, but he did well. And in fact, that was kind of your downside here. Like Howell was a bit of a dud for you. and you certainly had a couple disappointing performances, but you just didn't really have that one or two go off, which you've been doing pretty consistently in the last couple weeks when you've been winning, is someone or a group of people just completely go well over, and that kind of carries you out. Had you had one or two of those performances, you might have been able to take down the mighty Pamela. Unfortunately for you, you didn't end up doing so, but fortunately for you, take a look at the people you're getting back off your bye weeks. Fields also being hurt, who might be coming back any week from now. So in general, the future does look bright, but unfortunately, you fall to 3-4. Whereas Pamela, you stay on the top of the mountain. One more week with the belt. Congratulations to our overall number one. Earlier on the year, there was a 7-8, and I referred to it as the toilet bowl, so I can't not do it again. But these were special people in a special matchup. I actually think this was very kind of Kelsey and Frankie. As we're going to see, the victory unfortunately fell through the grass. They could have gone on a 3-game winning streak, which I'm still cheering for them. I think us that started off slow. We all deserve a run. Didn't mean to bump into each other so early, but finally, I earned a win, so feel good for me. Come on, guys. You have to feel like at least I've deserved something with all my rambling. How I did it, Allen and my two running backs pretty much. Not this running back. He disappointed me, but this one down here. Gibbs and Kamara were collectively RB2 and RB3. Allen was our quarterback 4. Everybody else, just did okay. I mean, love to get points was great. Oh, and Cleveland's defense. I'm the only one who took a top 5 defense. Cleveland was the number 3, who, even though they looked horrible and they let up a lot of points, they also, 3 fumbles, a touchdown, tons of sacks. They killed Minshew, even though Minshew, our quarterback 3, just dropped him. Unbelievable. On my bench, left a whole bunch of points. I'm just figuring out now with Moss and Taylor, who I think it looks like the weight has gone more heavily to one side than the other, which makes me a little bit happier. Ford actually hurt himself, so for those looking on the waiver wire, it's already passed, but a Cleveland running back might be a decent idea. He had actually not a great performance. He just had one massive run. He took off, I think it was his second or third carry of the game, busted it for a 60-plus yard touchdown, did nothing for the rest of the game. So that still would have helped me out. I'm glad I didn't put him in for my running backs, but them over Robinson would have been a good one. So I can claim I could have had a few more points here, right? So don't go crazy. And they just cut my kicker, which is random. He did go 4 for 4 the game before, but he missed a couple this week, so they just straight up cut him. So that's the NA, no longer in existence. I know that's not what NA stands for, but that's what it means to me. Kelsey, Frankie, you still had a great week. Cousins, you just dealt with him. Got rid of Stroud, who was on a bye. You got Cousins, and he came out with a huge performance. You were way closer than I thought you were going to be after Monday night. I think the bummer is you had the defense against your quarterback, so effectively you really limit, every interception they get is an interception he throws, and it kind of cancels each other out. So it is just unfortunate luck that way. And your kicker, the rookie, he's been okay, hit a 50-yarder, but that's about it. Realistically, Kelsey going off, like I said in the intro, he was amazing. If you didn't watch the game, you would think Pittman went off. He also didn't. He had 2 catches. One was near the end of the game on just a Hail Mary that just found its way through, and he ran for a 75-yard touchdown. So I was super pumped that Pittman had nothing on the go. In the 1 o'clock games, you guys barely had anyone playing, and I was watching, and all of a sudden Pittman breaks, and I'm like, that's it. I'm going to lose. I'm destined. Had you put Algier in, though, for our boy Evans. Now, don't feel bad. Evans was supposed to be the starter until 2 days before, and then they split. They signed a guy that used to be on the team in Henderson, and then Freeman got in. So Evans didn't get any love when he was supposed to get at least some love. If he would have gotten any kind of love, he would have been fine, or your boy Algiers here. Again, we didn't know that Robinson wasn't going to play for Atlanta, so Algiers got the carries, and he had another good outing. So I'm sorry, Kelsey, Frankie. I know we are spiritual compatriots on this one, as we started off low and we're both now making a run for it. But I bested you on this one, but I do wish you best of luck next week. In our fourth and final match, we did have our 2 lowest scores coming in. Now, we had one team overachieve, one team underachieve, but you could tell right away this one was going to be a nail-biter. First things first, Jackson came out. Lamar had a massive game. I thought he was going to be quarterback 1. He was quarterback 2 because we know what Mahomes did, but he had a great outing. Evans played great. Unfortunately, that was kind of it for your team here. But congrats, this is the first one with Nick on the team, and you did squeak it out. Now, this was the second tightest, Kelsey and I was 5.04. This was 6.04, I think. I may have done the math wrong there, but this was 6.04. Maybe I had the decimal wrong on ours. 6.06, that's why. See, that's why you don't do math on the go. So you just ended up squeaking it out. Now, I think the big thing to celebrate, like I mentioned to a previous person, this was a buy-a-palooza, and you had your injuries, so you really didn't have a lot of options on the bench. So you threw together the team that you needed to put together, and they just managed through, right? I think Kansas City was a nice little benefit. The fact that Herbert had such a bad game and he was tossing it up. You would have wanted a better game from Goff. He's been playing pretty well recently, so it actually would have been an upgrade to put Dobbs in, but I understand the decision. Either way, 10 over your predicted. Well done there. Paul, fallen from grace. You definitely have your ups and downs. You are the drink buyer this week. Now, you are the third person to have 2, and I will explain a little bit more. I have a feeling people aren't actually listening to this, and I'm going to have to re-explain it. So I'm just going to say it until it happens, but I'll talk about what the dead week means when I get to the weekly wrap-up just next year. But it wasn't like you had a total stinker. Etienne had a great game. He's actually proven to be a massive pickup for you. He's had a couple good games in a row. Etienne was our running back 5. Okay, just ahead of Gus the Bus Edwards, who was a free agent, just FYI for Baltimore people. I think the biggest thing for you is Eckler was supposed to come back and be a force, and he just didn't have a great game, didn't look completely back. Kelly took a few of his snaps away, and that was really the thing that I think probably was the biggest indicator. Yes, Adams can have good games, but with their quarterback situation right now, I didn't necessarily expect it. Everyone else kind of did what they should. You had also the same problem as Jules here, with your Kelsey and Frankie, your defense and your quarterback playing each other. That's always a tough one because you want those turnovers here, but then you get dinged for them here. So you kind of negated and Tua not having a fantastic outing. Had he played normally, maybe you stay out of the basement and you keep the losing streak going. But as it stands, you held strong. Now, fortunately for you, Paul, your record precedes you. You only have 3 wins, but right now, as we're going to see when I get to the league breakdown, 3 wins is actually quite good. You're still 4th in the league, and it's coming down to points scored, and you've scored enough in the past. You've had the highest scoring team in other weeks, so that benefits you, and you're currently sitting in 4th, meaning you would squeak through the playoffs if they happen today, but they're not going to. We're still just at the halfway point here. So, unfortunately, Paul, you are the drink buyer. But congratulations, Kate and Nick. You're back in the win column, as you let everybody know on the chat group. So, well played there. All right, reflecting on week 7, just quickly, you'll look here at our standings. So obviously me getting my first win is making me pretty happy. But what also is making me pretty happy is the fact that since we have 2 runaways here with only 1 loss, you'll notice here, 3 wins still possibly get you in the playoff if you're a high-scoring team. So nobody's out of it quite yet. I say that as a reassuring pat on my own back so I can feel better about myself. But it is going to be this next little run to see how we do. Props to Paul for still sticking strong with no moves. I don't know if that's more or less respect, but you're still doing fine, so can't be too mad about it. As we look over to week 8, we are going to start to see some shaping here. Now, if this opponent looks familiar to you, not only because we're friends and we all know each other, but this is who you played in week 1, I believe. It's who you're going to play in week 8, and it's who you're going to play in week 15. This is the only team you're going to play 3 times, just the way our schedule works. That's the way it kind of breaks down. Now, you might see other people in the playoffs, obviously, but we don't know what that shapes out to be yet. So, we've got a couple good matchups. I think Raf at 3 is looking to try and narrow the gap so he can try and make it into the top 2. Pamela looking to keep her dominance on top. Last time they played, they had to buy, so let's see how that works. Now, just quickly on the buying drinks. Remember, that's Kelsey and Frankie, myself, and Paul now. We've all lost twice. The reason I'm not saying that we skip one of those yet, if you remember, since there's 15 weeks, there's 8 of us. You can do the math. We would all have to buy twice except for one person. No fun. So that is where I brought up that dead week. If you don't understand that concept, you can ask questions. But effectively, let's say I have the lowest score this week. It would just be a dead week. Nobody owes. I won't pay over 2, but I'm not going to make the next person play. However, if in week 9, I'm again the lowest, not only will I be super upset with myself, but then you would skip me and go to the next lowest so that we just take a week away so that hopefully some people can strategize and maybe try to avoid the drink buying. That's kind of the point of it. So there you go. But here's hoping, Kelsey, you don't kind of fall victim to the Widowmaker. In fact, you and Frankie been a bit of a run. You had a great week last week, just fell short, so maybe you'll give Jackie a run for her money here and knock her down a peg. Got a 5-6 matchup, which is always super fun. I think it's going to end up being probably a little bit tighter after Jules makes her moves, and she's looking to bounce back, whereas Kate and Nick are looking to try to keep their momentum going. I get Paul on an off week and he goes off, then on, then off, then on. So I'm just going to assume he's going to score 140 points. So if I got to beat him, my guys better show up. Anywho, the only other thing to probably mention, you probably noticed there was a little bit less stress this week. There is no buys for week 8, so all teams are playing again. So if your injuries are up there, that's why you'll have to replace some of those players. There wasn't a massive injury push, so here's hoping that your lineups can stay relatively static, or you can make some moves based on matchups as you see fit. Anywho, by now, hopefully, we've already had our drink. It was good to see people then. Look at me predicting into the future just because I likely won't have this done before I leave, but it should be up just after. Let's get some more of the drinks rolling because that'll be fun. But in the meantime, best of luck heading into Thursday and heading into week 8.